My name is Owen. About 2 years ago, I was working as an IT specialist for a tech company in Texas when a new employee named Merlin was hired. He had an impressive resume with a degree from a prestigious university, but his physical appearance was an insult to a professional office environment. Merlin always wore clothes that were wrinkled and badly faded, and sometimes they were covered with strange, dark stains. But the worst part was the smell that radiated from him, a pungent, suffocating mix of rubbing alcohol and heavy bleach. Nobody wanted to get close to Merlin. Everyone was polite to his face, but their avoidance was obvious because they always found an excuse to leave the room whenever he showed up. Since I was the person assigned to train new hires, I had to interact with him whether I wanted to or not. After a few days of talking to him, I was actually impressed by how smart he was. Since we had to attend meetings with outside partners, I tried to give him some subtle advice about his choice of clothes. Merlin just laughed it off and said it was his special hobby. One night, the two of us worked overtime until almost 9 p.m. When we finished, Merlin suddenly asked if I wanted to go to his place to see something interesting. For some reason I still don't understand, I agreed to go. Merlin's apartment was in an old complex quite far from the city center. As soon as he opened the door, I immediately regretted coming. The inside looked like a junkyard. Clothes were scattered everywhere, on chairs, across the floor, and piled up in heaps mixed with cardboard boxes and empty bottles. The air was thick with the choking smell of medical alcohol and cleaning chemicals. Merlin opened a cardboard box and pulled out a man's jacket with a massive stain right on the chest. He began to cradle it, stroking the fabric gently. He whispered about how great the jacket was and said the previous owner had a vibrant life before being crushed to death by a semi-truck. I stood there frozen. I was shivering, and I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. He looked at me and happily explained that he bought clothes from dead people on the dark web. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked him why on earth he would do that. Merlin held his head high with a very confident air. He spoke very clearly about how he wanted to help the dead continue their lives by wearing their clothes. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He told me that lately, buying clothes from the internet wasn't satisfying enough anymore. Merlin said he wanted clothes that still had the fresh scent of a recent death. Merlin started talking about homeless people, saying that if they disappeared, nobody would even notice. I couldn't take another second of it. I stammered an excuse about feeling sick and walked as fast as I could toward the door. Merlin didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching me leave with a blank stare that was absolutely terrifying. I left that apartment in a state of total shock. For the next few days, I avoided Merlin at all costs. I only talked to him when it was absolutely necessary for work, kept my distance, and made sure I was never alone with him. A week later, Merlin vanished. At first, everyone thought he was just out sick. Later, HR said they couldn't reach him and terminated his contract. Merlin's desk was cleared out, and his internal accounts were locked. His name slowly faded away from office gossip. I never went to the police because I had no evidence other than the ramblings of an eccentric guy. To this day, I still don't know if Merlin actually carried out the things he hinted at. I don't know if he disappeared because he ran away, moved to a new city, or because he did something truly horrific. Ever since then, whenever I pass a homeless person on the street, I unconsciously stop to look at them a little closer. And every time I smell the scent of bleach, I am instantly taken back to Merlin's horrifying apartment. I still wonder, did he really go through with his twisted plan to become a killer? My name is Beavis. At the time, I lived alone in an old apartment complex on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The building was pretty run down, with thin walls and creaky hardwood floors. As for the soundproofing, I'm not even sure it existed. Working as a freelance IT guy meant I spent most of my time at home. The apartment directly above me belonged to the Wilsons. I wasn't close with them. I just knew there were three of them: Mr. Robert Wilson, his wife, and their teenage daughter. They weren't like normal neighbors. Every single night, they held prayer sessions that lasted for hours. It wouldn't have mattered if they were just a typical devout family, but I had never heard a religious gathering get that loud before. It always started with rapid, broken chanting, followed by the sound of heavy stomping, jumping, and chaotic movement. In this neighborhood, people usually kept to themselves, so I hesitated to say anything to them. Then, one night, things went too far, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Around midnight, the chanting started again, but this time, it was 3 times louder than usual. It sounded like several people talking at once in a state of total frenzy. Heavy footsteps thudded constantly, sometimes running in circles, sometimes stomping in place. I looked at the glass of water on my desk and could actually see the surface vibrating. I tried to endure it, checking my watch and telling myself I'd give them 10 more minutes to finish up. But then, there was a massive crash, like a piece of furniture being knocked over. Right after that, a blood-curdling scream rang out, making me jump out of my seat. I rushed to my door, intending to run upstairs and see what was happening. But the moment I touched the doorknob, all the noise stopped. The sudden silence made me hesitate. I stood there for a few seconds, listening intently. There wasn't another sound, so I went back inside. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of religion practiced such bizarre rituals. Over the next 2 days, the total silence from the Wilson apartment started to make me uneasy. On the morning of the 3rd day, someone began pounding on my door. They were clearly in a desperate hurry. When I opened it, I froze. Robert Wilson was standing there, but he looked absolutely pathetic. His face was gaunt and pale, his eyes were sunken, and he had a look of pure terror. His clothes were covered in filth, and a stench so foul wafted off him that I had to hold my breath. He looked at me and wheezed out a plea to call 911, then immediately turned and ran down the stairs. He was in such a rush that he tripped and fell, but he didn't waste a second getting back up to keep running. I felt a deep sense of dread. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and ran up to their apartment. The door was unlocked. When I pushed it open, a horrific smell hit me like a physical wall. I had to stop for a few seconds just to keep from gagging. The scene inside was beyond anything I could have imagined. Every inch of the floor, walls, and furniture was covered in a thick, disgusting residue. Trash was scattered everywhere. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room until I saw their daughter. She was lying motionless, her body curled in a cramped position. I didn't dare get close. I didn't want to disturb the scene if the worst had happened. The police arrived and cordoned off the area. The investigation moved quickly, and the truth they uncovered haunts me to this day. A few weeks before the incident, the girl had fallen ill. Instead of taking her to a hospital, the Wilsons believed she was possessed by a demon. They thought the whole family was infected and needed to be purified. Believing that demons were repelled by filth, they began a sick ritual. They ate their own waste and vomit, repeating the cycle in an uncontrollable frenzy. The noises I had been hearing all those weeks were part of that ritual. The scream I heard that final night was the moment the girl reached her breaking point. She had passed away because her airway became blocked. The Wilsons were arrested, but the court eventually ruled that they suffered from shared psychotic disorder and were not mentally fit to be held criminally responsible. They were acquitted. I moved out of that apartment immediately, taking only my documents, phone, and laptop. To this day, it's not just what I saw that haunts me, it's what I heard and chose to ignore. I live in a sturdy house in a nice neighborhood now, but I still imagine I hear footsteps echoing from the ceiling. Worse yet, there are moments when I swear I can still smell that stench and hear the faint chanting of people lost in a broken faith. This story is based on a real event from 2005 in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. A young man living below the Wu family frequently heard strange chanting. On the night of April 9th, he heard a terrifying scream followed by silence. 2 days later, Mr. Wu appeared filthy and panicked, asking for help. Upon checking the apartment, the neighbor found the daughter's body in a house filled with filth. The investigation revealed the superstitious family believed they were possessed and performed extreme rituals, including consuming waste. The victim died of a blocked airway, and the family was acquitted due to collective delusional disorder. My name is Emily. About 2 years ago, I was working as a UI/UX designer in San Francisco. The pay wasn't bad, but because it's one of the most expensive cities in the world, I had to watch every penny. Rent took up the biggest chunk of my paycheck, and it was my biggest source of stress. That's why I didn't hesitate when I met Ryan on a project, and he suggested we share an apartment to save money. For starters, Ryan was very polite and easy to talk to. More importantly, I was convinced he was gay. He was always very close with male coworkers and even showed some public affection toward them. I felt safe accepting his offer. The apartment we rented was near downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and had everything we needed. The first few days were totally normal. We kept a respectful distance and didn't interfere in each other's lives. About a week in, I started noticing that Ryan frequently brought strange men home in the evening. At first, it wasn't many, but eventually, it seemed like someone was over every single night. They usually went straight to Ryan's private room and stayed behind closed doors for hours. The house would get very quiet. What bothered me wasn't just the visitors. It was the way they looked at me when they left. Their eyes seemed to be scanning and judging me. One time, I caught a man staring me up and down before he walked out. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured they were just awkward around women and let it go. After about a month, my health started to fail in a strange way. Every morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and sore in every muscle, as if I had been physically tortured. My memory started to fade, my head felt heavy, and I lived in a constant brain fog. My performance at work took a nosedive. During those dark days, Ryan was the perfect roommate. He was so caring, reminding me of deadlines, helping me with my work, and sometimes even cooking for me. I planned to monitor the situation for a few more weeks before seeing a doctor to figure out what was wrong. Then came one night when, after eating a dinner Ryan prepared, I felt so tired I could barely lift my arms or legs. I went to my room and lost consciousness almost as soon as I hit the bed. Sometime later, I woke up in a half-conscious, dazed state. The room was dark. After a few seconds, I jumped in terror when I realized a man was standing right next to my bed. He was wearing only his underwear and was staring intensely at me. I screamed in panic. The man immediately turned and ran out. A moment later, Ryan appeared and flipped on the light. He hurried to explain that it was just his friend who had bad eyesight and had walked into the wrong room. I was too shaken and exhausted to argue. I told Ryan flatly that I wasn't okay with so many strangers coming in and out of the house. Ryan apologized and promised to be more careful. I tried to move on. A few days later, my life changed forever because of a single text message. That morning, Ryan left his phone on the table while he went to shower. I happened to look down just as a notification popped up. She makes me excited. I'll pay triple to get my turn sooner. I stood frozen as I read those words. She. Pay triple. My turn. I repeated those phrases in my head, connecting them to everything that had happened over the last 2 months. The men coming over at night, the way they looked at me, my unusual sleepiness, the chronic exhaustion, and the memory loss. Especially that man in his underwear. My heart started racing, and my head began to spin. I finally understood the truth. Ryan wasn't gay. He was a sick, twisted predator. He had been drugging my dinner every night, turning me into a tool for his disgusting transactions right inside our own home. My exhaustion and body aches weren't from overworking. They were the physical aftermath of being abused while I was unconscious. A wave of pure disgust washed over me. I ran to the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left but bitter bile. I spent hours in the shower, scrubbing myself until my skin was raw and red. I felt so stupid and cheap for being so trusting. I moved out quietly that very night. I couldn't bear to look at Ryan for another second. I felt nothing but pure hatred and revulsion for him. I quit my job, moved to a strange new city, and lived in a daze for a long time. I haven't shared this story with anyone because, besides the fear, I feel a deep sense of shame. One thing haunts me more than anything else. I don't know how many times it happened. I don't know how many men entered that room while I was unconscious. That uncertainty is like a parasite, eating away at my ability to trust anyone. Even now that I'm calmer, I still wonder if I should speak up. I've thought about going to the police, but I have no evidence, no recordings, and no photos. All I have is a text message I saw for a few seconds and a collection of broken memories.
My name is Hal. This story happened when I was 15 years old. My family didn't have much money, so we didn't go on vacations very often. That's why I was so excited when my best friend Jeff invited me to spend a few days at his family's lake house. Jeff's family was pretty well off. His dad had an important job, and I was told not to talk about it to anyone. The lake house looked like something out of a painting, surrounded by thick woods and calm, still water. But there was one person there I didn't expect: Bianca, Jeff's older cousin. Bianca was a year older than us. My first impression of her was that she was stylish, beautiful, and a bit cool. However, after a short time, I started noticing some very strange behavior. The first time was the evening we started a campfire by the lake. While we were gathering wood, we found a bunch of bugs under some rotting logs. I called Jeff over to look at them. Bianca joined us at first, but then she suddenly reached down, picked up several bugs, and crushed them barehanded. Then she took the slimy remains and smeared them all over her face. I froze, completely shocked. Jeff stayed calmer and kept telling her to stop. A moment later, Bianca's face started breaking out in red blotches. It looked like an allergic reaction, but she didn't seem bothered at all. Instead, she started and chased us around. It only stopped when Jeff's mom pulled her away, leaving us completely out of breath. Bianca's moods changed constantly. One minute she would talk normally and joke with everyone, but just a few minutes later she would suddenly become irritable and snap over the smallest thing. During those times, I just tried to stay away from her to avoid trouble and enjoy my vacation. Things took a terrifying turn on the third night of the trip. Jeff's dad got an urgent work call and had to leave. As evening approached, Jeff's mom drove into town to pick up some groceries. While she was gone, Jeff and I sat in the living room playing video games. Bianca was out on the back porch reading a book. After a while, Jeff realized he forgot something and ran off to go get it. I went out to the porch to wait for him, so it was just me and Bianca. The silence was a bit awkward, so I tried to start a conversation. I asked about her book. She held it up and explained that it was about a woman who had been abused by her husband for years. The man even tried to kill her, but she survived and planned a brutal revenge. I just gave a generic response about how intense that sounded. But Bianca suddenly looked straight at me and asked in a very eerie voice, "Can you imagine having to kill someone you love? Or being killed by them?" The question made me give a forced laugh. I told her it sounded like she was joking. Immediately, her attitude flipped. She stood up abruptly and shouted at me, making me jump. "I guess you'll never understand." Her eyes were so intense, filled with a strange kind of rage. Without another word, she turned and walked into the house. I sat there stunned until Jeff came back, and we went down to the dock to fish like we had planned. About half an hour later, I had to use the bathroom, so I headed back inside. It was pretty dark because the lights weren't on yet. As I walked past the hallway near Bianca's room, I suddenly saw her shadow standing in a dark corner. She was standing perfectly still, with both hands hidden behind her back. I jumped and made a joke about how she scared me, but she didn't react. That look in her eyes truly terrified me. I decided not to say anything else and tried to walk quickly past her to the bathroom. But the exact second I passed her, Bianca lunged at me. I felt a sharp, cold sting in my back. I screamed in horror as I realized blood was soaking through my shirt. I spun around and saw Bianca holding a large kitchen knife. The steel flashed in the dark, and her face looked completely insane. I scrambled toward the nearest bathroom because it was the only room with a lock. Bianca was screaming, right on my heels. She swung the knife again, grazing my shoulder just before I managed to slam the door and turn the deadbolt. From the other side of the wooden door, Bianca started clawing at it. She screamed twisted things that haunt me to this day. "Let me love you! You can love me too! We'll die together! That's the only way it's forever!" Blood from my back and shoulder dripped onto the bathroom floor. In a total panic, I climbed onto the windowsill and screamed for Jeff. He came sprinting into the house and saw his cousin frantically trying to break down the door with a knife. I heard Jeff screaming at her, calling her crazy and telling her to drop the knife. Bianca started sobbing, a miserable, distorted sound, and then she ran to her room and slammed the door. Jeff rushed into the bathroom to give me first aid. When his mom got home, she had to talk to Bianca for a long time before she finally opened her door. I was taken to the hospital that night. The stab wound in my back was deep and close to my spine. I had to get several stitches in both my back and my shoulder. I don't remember exactly why, but I stayed there for the rest of the vacation. However, from that moment on, Bianca was never allowed to be alone with me for even a single second. Jeff apologized over and over. He felt he should have warned me about her. He explained that Bianca had a very traumatic childhood and had been neglected by her parents, which left her with deep psychological scars. Jeff's family had eventually taken her in to give her a more stable home. Back then, and even now, I don't hold a grudge against Bianca. But regardless of the reasons, being chased and stabbed when I was only 15 remains one of the most horrifying experiences I have ever faced in my life. My name is Anthony. 7 years ago, when I was 21, I was studying environmental science at a local university in California. Outside of my classes, I spent most of my free time gaming and making friends online. Some people think gaming is a waste of time, but for me, it was a way to connect with interesting people from all over the world. Rick was one of those friends, and he was a very special case. We met through a Discord server for people who loved gaming and tech. Rick was smart and fun to talk to, but he was also a bit mysterious. He lived in a state thousands of miles away from me. He never posted photos of himself, and he had a habit of disappearing for a few days at a time without any explanation. I never really worried about it until I started getting some very strange messages from him. "Anthony, bro, something is seriously wrong in my house," Rick messaged me at 1 a.m. He told me that for 2 weeks, random objects in his apartment had been disappearing. First, it was a plug-in mosquito repeller from the living room. Then, it was his travel neck pillow. The creepy part was that after they went missing, he would always find them shoved deep into a tiny gap behind his bedroom wardrobe. The gap is so tight. The space between the wardrobe and the wall is only about 3 or 4 inches. It's incredibly hard to reach. "I still haven't been able to get some of the stuff out," Rick said, sounding panicked. I have to admit, I got goosebumps. I had heard stories about the supernatural before, but I never really believed in ghosts. After a string of these weird events, everything suddenly stopped for 4 days. The silence didn't make him feel safe, though. It just made the air in his apartment feel heavy with anxiety. Since he didn't have a security system, Rick installed an app called Alfred on an old iPhone to turn it into a motion-sensing camera. He set it up to watch the living room and his bedroom. That night, Rick was woken up by a loud thud, the sound of something heavy hitting the hardwood floor. He jumped out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and checked the whole apartment. Everything looked fine. The front door was still deadbolted from the inside. The windows were high up and the screens weren't torn. Rick went back to bed, trying to convince himself it was just a noise from a neighbor's place. The next morning, he opened the camera app. It had recorded 3 motion-triggered events while he was fast asleep. He sent the photos to me over Discord. "I don't see anything except the vase and the piano," Rick messaged back with a nervous laughing emoji. But when I zoomed in on the second photo, my heart dropped. At the bottom of the frame, near the legs of the piano, there was an unidentified dark shape. It was a blurry mass hiding in the shadows. By the third photo, the horror was undeniable. Something was blocking the iPhone lens. When we turned up the brightness and contrast, we both went numb. It was a hand, or at least a thin wrist with long, pale fingers, reaching out right in front of the camera lens. It wasn't a ghost, it was physical. While Rick was panicking, my environmental science background kicked in. I thought of a theory that was more realistic, but just as deadly. "Rick," I typed quickly, "do you have a carbon monoxide detector in your house?" I explained to him that CO leaks are known as silent killers. The gas has no smell or color. If you breathe in small amounts over a long time, it causes hallucinations, temporary memory loss, and strange sleepwalking behavior. People with CO poisoning have been known to hide their own things or make noises and then completely forget about it the next morning. "You said you've been tired and having headaches lately, right? Those are classic signs of CO poisoning," I told him. Rick was quiet for a moment. Then he replied, "I don't have a CO detector." "Damn it, you might be right. I just thought I was stressed from overworking." I told Rick to go buy a detector immediately. I also told him to be safe and stay at a hotel or a friend's place for a few days. Rick said he would do that and would update me the next day. I waited until the next morning. No message. I waited another day. Rick still wasn't online. I sent a flood of messages on Discord, checked his Instagram, and even tried calling him through the app, but everything stayed silent. A day turned into a week, then a month. Rick's disappearance was exactly like the objects in his house. He vanished behind a curtain of silence without a single trace or explanation. It has been 7 years since that last message. To this day, I still go back to that old server and look at Rick's grayed-out username. My CO theory might have been right, and maybe he just drifted off to sleep that night before he could buy a detector. Or maybe the hand in that third photo really belonged to a stranger hiding in his apartment, and that thud was the start of a much darker ending than I want to imagine. Everything I knew about Rick was just a screen name. I didn't have his address or his family's phone number to check on him. That silence is like an open wound in my mind. I still hope that one day his username will light up again, and he'll tell me he just moved to a new place and forgot his Discord password. My name is Kelly. This story happened 3 years ago, right on St. Patrick's Day. Usually on that night, the streets are a sea of green. Everyone is out drinking beer, singing, and partying until the crack of dawn. My friends had all made big plans to go out that year, but as luck would have it, I got stuck working the night shift at the bar because a coworker called out at the last minute. There was a guy named Brad who worked as a dishwasher at the bar. He was a gentle soul who mostly kept to himself in the back kitchen. Brad was a big guy with a rugged look that could be intimidating at first glance, but he was actually very polite and easygoing. From the day he started, Brad was open with everyone about having schizophrenia. He didn't hide it at all. He even explained to us that he sometimes heard or saw things that weren't actually there. Despite that, Brad took his medication regularly and was a hard worker. Occasionally, he would mumble to himself while scrubbing dishes or mopping, but it didn't bother anyone, so we all just got used to it. However, that night, Brad's behavior started to get weirder than usual. Throughout the shift, I noticed him constantly heading out to the dumpster area behind the bar. At first, I thought he was just taking out the trash, but after he went out several times in a row, I realized something was off. Every time he went out, Brad would stand in front of the dumpster for a long time. He would turn his back to the rear door of the bar and mutter things under his breath. Sometimes his voice sounded agitated, like he was having a full-blown argument with the trash bin. A curious bartender opened the door and asked, "Brad, you okay, man?" Brad didn't answer. He just stood there for a few more seconds before heading back to the kitchen to work. This happened over and over for hours. Most of the staff started to think he was just having hallucinations because of his condition. Things got tense near the end of the night. As the crowd started to thin out, I stepped into the back alley for a quick break. It was pretty dark back there. The second I stepped outside, Brad suddenly appeared in front of me. Before I could even react, he cornered me against the back wall of the building. I will never forget the look on his face. His eyes were welling up with tears, and he didn't look angry. He looked absolutely terrified. He leaned in close and said in a trembling voice, "The garbage man wants to take you." I froze for a few seconds. My first thought was that Brad was having an episode, so I tried to calm him down, but Brad wouldn't listen. He kept blocking my path, his eyes darting around frantically as he shook his head over and over. I started to get scared. When Brad's massive frame took another step toward me, I panicked and screamed for help. The manager came running out immediately. He and another employee had to physically pull Brad away from me. Even as they dragged him off, Brad was crying and shouting that I was in danger. At that point, we were all convinced he was having a breakdown. To keep things from getting worse, the manager told Brad to go home early and take the rest of the night off. After Brad left, I was still shaken up, but I tried to brush it off and kept working until closing time. A few hours later, as we were shutting down the bar, I took a bag of trash out to the back. The alley was dead silent. I walked up to the large dumpster and flipped the lid open. In that exact heartbeat, a man suddenly lunged out from inside. My heart nearly stopped. When I caught my breath and saw his face under the dim alley light, a horror far worse than the initial jump scare hit me. It was my ex-boyfriend, the most unhinged person I've ever known. I'd had to get a restraining order against him because he had a habit of stalking and lurking around me after we broke up. He reeked of garbage, but mixed in with the stench was the smell of cologne. The two scents combined into something sickening. He stepped out of the dumpster, staring at me intensely, and slowly started walking toward me. I was so terrified I couldn't even make a sound. I backed up until my shoulders hit the brick wall. He stood right in front of me, his large body blocking any escape. I noticed he was hiding one hand behind his back, as if he were holding something. Luckily, it was a holiday night. Right at that moment, a few people happened to be walking past the alley, and they immediately realized something was wrong. 3 men from the group rushed in to help. One of them pulled me away and called the police, while the other 2 tackled him to the ground and held him down. Within minutes, the cops arrived and arrested him on the spot. Later, once everything was sorted out, the chilling truth came to light. Brad had actually seen my ex hiding in the dumpster very early in the night. But my ex had used Brad's schizophrenia against him, trying to make Brad doubt his own eyes. That was why Brad kept going out back. He was arguing with the dumpster to check if what he saw was real or a hallucination, all while trying to find a way to warn me. The tragedy was that because of his illness, none of us believed a word he said. In the end, my ex was locked up and faced serious legal trouble. My manager and I were left carrying a huge weight of guilt. The next day, we sincerely apologized to Brad for not trusting him. Brad just gave us a small smile and said he didn't hold a grudge. But even now, whenever I think back to that night, I still get shivers. I know that in that situation, most people would have reacted just like we did, assuming it was an episode and ignoring the warning. My name is Cassie. I'm 28 years old, and I've only just started learning how to breathe again without feeling like my chest is being crushed. I met him during my senior year of college. I was about to graduate and was so excited about my future. He was smart, charming, and seemed very mature. He even had a stable job working for the IRS. In the beginning, our relationship was beautiful. But just a few months in, red flags started making me feel very uncomfortable. At first, it looked like he just cared about me. He would ask if I had worked out yet, then gently guilt-trip me if I was too busy to hit the gym. He insisted on knowing exactly what I was doing every single day, who I was meeting, and where I was going. He even made constant comments about everything I ate. Even though he used positive words, his need for control gave me the chills. I felt like he was treating me more like a child or a pet that needed training rather than a girlfriend. When I tried to have a serious talk about it, he completely shut down. It was only when I threatened to leave that he finally gave in. He promised to change, but he followed that promise with a childish, sulky attitude. We had about a month of peace before he went right back to his old ways. I realized then that this man had no intention of changing. After more than a year together, I finally broke up with him. The breakup was pathetic. He cried, screamed, and begged so much that I didn't even recognize the man I once loved. A week of silence passed after the breakup, and I thought it was finally over. But that was only the beginning. After that quiet week, he started texting me non-stop. At first, the messages were about how much he missed me and wanted to get back together. When I didn't reply, his tone shifted. The texts became angry and full of insults. Not long after, a package arrived at my office. Inside was a teddy bear and a long letter asking me to reconsider. I decided to cut off all contact, but he didn't stop. My phone was flooded with messages and calls until I was finally forced to change my number. I thought that would be the end of it, but things quickly got much scarier. It started with me accidentally bumping into him at the Publix grocery store near my house. Then I started seeing him everywhere, on my way home from work, while walking my dog, and even when I went for a run. I applied for a restraining order, but the court denied it because I didn't have enough evidence. It wasn't until I gathered dozens of photos of him showing up at different locations that the order was finally granted. However, he was cunning. He stayed exactly 100 feet away to follow the court's rules, just so he could stand in the distance and stare at me. His gaze felt like a cold challenge. I'm right here, and you can't do anything about it. Terrified, I decided to erase my entire social media presence. I requested a transfer at work and moved to a different city 50 miles away. But just a few months later, he found my new address and my new phone number. I spiraled into a total panic. I started doubting my friends and family, wondering if someone had betrayed me. I even threatened to sue the local phone book company, but they insisted my name had been unlisted. For 3 long years, I lived in a state of constant stress. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I was constantly paranoid. Eventually, my body just gave out. I fainted at my desk from sheer exhaustion and a nervous breakdown. Then one day, just 2 months before the stalking reached the 4-year mark, a friend sent me a news link. It was an article about a major federal investigation into the IRS. Several employees were being investigated for abusing their access to private government databases. His name was right there on the front page. That was how he always found me. He had been abusing his power as a government employee to look up my tax records, tracking every small change to my home address and workplace. Misusing federal data for personal reasons is a serious felony, and he and his coworkers were facing long prison sentences. I thought I would have to live in fear for a few more years until he got out of prison. But peace came in a way I never expected. Unable to face the charges and the public shame, my ex-boyfriend took his own life before the sentencing hearing. I'm not ashamed to say that I burst into tears of pure relief when I heard the news. It might sound heartless, but that man burned away the best years of my youth. He stole my ability to trust people and turned me into someone who constantly looks over her shoulder while walking down the street. His own obsession and need for possession drove him into that dead end. He never cared about the damage he did to me, so I didn't shed a single tear for how he ended. Finally, after years of living in hell, I was actually free.